The Nintendo DS is 20 years old this year. Well, it's actually been 20 for a few months now. Since November 21st, 2024 in fact. Nowadays it seems kinda quaint, not only because it's a handheld that actually fits in your pocket, but also because it's a touchscreen device in a world where touchscreen devices weren't all that commonplace yet. Yet this clamshell classic won the hearts of most of us growing up in the 2000s, and it remains a pretty special and unique device to this day. I won't go into massive detail about its launch, that's already been done better and more thoroughly by people who are much more interesting to listen to. I'm just going to give you a quick little overview of the DS and what it was capable of. And here it is in all its cased glory. This is the case that I originally got with my DS, which is incredible because it didn't actually fit my DS when I first got it, but we'll get into exactly why that was in just a moment. But let's get this open so we can observe the DS Lite. This is my original DS Lite, and isn't it fabulous? If it was in focus, then we might even be able to tell. There we go. And it's a fairly unassuming little thing, isn't it? It's a very square item. Not got a great deal of stuff on the outside. We've got the charger, we've got the lanyard, that's where your game goes. Left, right bumpers, or shoulder buttons as we used to call them. That's where the stylus goes. Again, stuff we'll get into. Power thing. I don't know what to describe that as. It sort of goes up and then springs back. I'm sure it's got a technical name. You can plug in some headphones. I've never known what that square one is. It's something. Volume and the slot 2. Again, we'll get into the purpose of that very, very soon. So, just to get the old tech specs out of the way, because they are perhaps the least important part of this system. 2 screens, as you can plainly tell, as well as a microphone and a control layout that is very reminiscent of the SNES. So you've got the double diamond, as it's called, start and select, shoulder buttons, basically a SNES layout, which was quite new to consoles at the time. Not consoles, handhelds at the time. And yeah, 2 screens, 256 by 192 resolution, not especially high, and in fact a bit lower than indeed the SNES and the NES and pretty much every other console ever, which means that if you wanted to run an NES game full screen, ain't happening. But you do have 2 of them, so it does change things somewhat. 2 speakers, a bit tinny, we'll get into the audio. And, well, yeah, that's what the system looked like. It's got 4 megabytes of RAM, pretty powerful, huh? And it's got 2 CPUs, one I think 67 megahertz, the other 33 megahertz, with duties split across both. So what you're perhaps gathering is that on paper, this thing is a lot less powerful than, for example, my Pentium 2 that I've got up there, which was, probably 6, 7, 8 years older than this. And that kind of, on a technical level, represents the still massive gulf between the consoles and the handhelds, because by the time this came out, we had things like the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, even the Xbox had come out, and they, if you compared the games between this and something on the Xbox, it's night and day. Naturally, it would be with specs like that. But the thing about the DS is, the specs just do not matter at all, because it's got something that no other system at the time had, and in fact very few devices at the time had. Now, I remember when this came out, and I actually was not even aware that this could... It didn't even cross my mind that this was a touchscreen. I thought it was just literally 2 screens. And that kind of goes to show the fact that touchscreens weren't prevalent. Prior to this, you had consoles, handheld consoles that looked a bit like that, with D-pad 2 buttons, and it was just a screen. And even the one directly preceding the DS, the Game Boy Advance, again, D-pad 2 buttons, little screen, no backlight. And that's kind of what you expected from your handhelds. They were very, very iterative. So even going from the Game Boy to the Colour to the Lite to the Advance to the Micro, all of those different Game Boy styles, they were all very much iterative. They were just a better Game Boy. And it was the same with the consoles in a way. So the NES came out, and yeah, that was something entirely fresh, right? It was very, very different to the likes of the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision and stuff that was out and contemporaneous to the NES. But for all intents and purposes, it was still a little console with a connected to a telly with a little controller with 2 buttons, and it was again quite iterative. It didn't do anything mind-blowing other than be a really good console. The SNES was just a better NES, effectively. The N64 was a 3D console. It was just a better SNES, in effect. And that's how consoles were. Even the GameCube was just a better N64. It was just, let's make this thing but more powerful and better and can do things that make it look more powerful and better. And that was what Nintendo were like. It wasn't really until the DS came out that they became known as being the quirky video game company. And after this, I mean, you could argue that, yeah, the GameCube was the start of that because of the controller and some of the games that were on there. But I think this was the tipping point, because you had this system that could do games that literally nothing else could, and even now, it's very difficult to replicate the DS experience in many ways. And since then, we've had stuff like the Wii and the Wii U and the Switch, and it's all been very kind of left field stuff, quite quirky, whereas the other manufacturers have just gone for, well, the Xbox, but better. So you can kind of get the sense that this was like their brand new strategy at the time. And especially when you consider that the DS's main competitor was the PSP. Which I thought I had to hand, but I guess I do not. Oh, I do. Hang on. And the PSP, well, yeah, it's widescreen, it's got 4 buttons, it's got lots of little buttons on the bottom, and a joystick, whoa. But, and if you compare the two, you can very plainly see that one can do games that the other physically cannot. But the PSP was just a little PS2, effectively, and it was just, you know, a little console, but better. The DS had stuff going on that nobody else could do. And especially when you consider that at the time, because, I mean, I've not been abundantly clear about this, but yes, that is a touchscreen. In 2004, nothing had touchscreens. That's not strictly true. You had things like the Palm Pocket PCs and stuff like that. Lots of Windows mobile devices. I'll show some on screen here. And Nokia Symbian devices, and they existed and they were around, but it wasn't the sort of thing that you could just pop into the shop and buy. It wasn't a consumer item. Nobody was wandering around with a Windows mobile, just using it as a mobile. If you had a mobile phone, chances are it looked like this, or perhaps like this, but with a colour screen. Better make sure I don't drop that too hard, or else it'll drill through to the core of the planet. Anyway, if you had a phone, it had a little screen and a keypad and buttons. It did not have a touchscreen. And even, I mean, touchscreens didn't really come about in phones until the iPhone in 2006. And even after that, it wasn't until sort of late noughties and early 10s when they became affordable enough that everybody suddenly had a smartphone with a touchscreen. So, when you consider that, the DS becomes even more a unique and quirky device, because touchscreens suddenly became the domain of the public. It was just this thing that anybody could get hold of now. But like I said, I remember when this came out and I didn't realise that was a touchscreen. I saw lots of screenshots of the DS and I just assumed that that was just for like displaying HUD elements and maps and things like that. Now, many games did just do that, but there were a lot of games that did make really good and inventive use of the touchscreen. But let's stop going on about it and turn the damn thing on, shall we? Didn't turn the volume up first, hold on. And there it is. I feel like I've just transported a lot of people back to the mid-2000s. So, you get this health and safety thing, rubbish. And, again, this is kind of... At the time, this was a relatively new thing. Not a lot of consoles. I mean, in this generation, consoles, when you turn them on, they did kind of give you a few more features than previous consoles had. But by and large, consoles didn't do a great deal when you turn them on without a game in them, because, you know, they were games consoles. It's not like today where you get a console and it's basically just a mini computer and it's got all these different functions, 90% of which you won't even use. And, you know, the DS didn't do a great deal just on its own. Case in point, you've got a clock and a calendar up here, and the calendar doesn't even have, like, events or anything like that. It literally just tells you what date it is. There are two inbuilt functions, though. You've got the brightness, you've got the system settings, which are out of focus. Come on, there we go, goodbye. And you've got an alarm system. You can get it to wake you up on a morning. In fact, I'm not actually sure what it does. I've never tried it myself. I assume it wakes you up in the morning, but now I'm thinking about it, I feel like it just turns the system on. I'm not exactly sure, but we're not going to try it out now. Now, you've got two options when you start the system up without a game in. You've got Pick to Chat and you've got DS Download Play. Now, this was incredible. I'll go into what that was about. Pick to Chat was great because it was this inbuilt local chat program. Now, you'll see that it's got chat room A, B, C and D, and if I had another DS to hand that wasn't currently trying to fix itself by displaying a white screen, that's too long a story to get into, we could properly demonstrate this, but as it stands, you can just join a chat room as it is. And, well, there we go. So that shows you the messages that have been sent, and you can send a message. So here we are, this is the touchscreen, and it works exceptionally well. Again, remember, 2004, touchscreens were not really a consumer thing. It was just, they whacked it on there and it works great. So, modern touchscreens, there's two different styles of touchscreen in case you're not aware. One is called capacitive, and that's everywhere now. It's just the standard touchscreen, and it's best used with your thumbs because it's effectively electrical energy that makes it touch. There's a better explanations out there. I'm not a scientist, I don't really understand this stuff. But the DS and other systems of the time used something called a resistive touchscreen, so you can probably just about tell. You can see the reflection. It's still not in focus. Maybe you can't tell just by looking at it. You would have to feel it because, let's just clear that. It's actually two kind of separate layers and that push against each other. So it senses the resistance. Now, it does make for a more accurate touchscreen, but it's also not quite, well, using it with your thumb is just a bit haphazard. So while it does kind of work, that's why they gave everybody a little plastic stylus, which slots very nicely into the side. Something else that it has is a microphone. You can't send voice notes. Why would you want to do that? But a lot of games did use that. Usually, I mean, the example that comes to mind is there are certain parts of Zelda: The Phantom Hourglass where you have to blow into the mic. So it's just detecting noise basically, and you could shout into it. You could rub it against your face. Whatever makes noise, it'll do it. It was just. There was a lot to use here, and a lot of developers made some really inventive things with it. So anyway, games then. I'll just quickly talk about. We need to exit Pick to Chat. Exit Pick to Chat. This is the other issue with resistive touchscreens. You do need to calibrate them all the damn time. So I'll just quickly go into. God, that noise just takes me back every time. DS Download Play. I won't be able to demonstrate it here, but the idea of this was you could say you had a copy of Mario Kart DS and you wanted to play with someone but they didn't have a copy of Mario Kart DS. You could say to them, no worries, just turn on DS Download Play and we'll play it just off my card. And that works really well. I think you can only play as Shy Guy or Yoshi or something like that. I think it's Shy Guy in DS. And you don't get to pick tracks or anything like that. And it takes forever to get going because it needs to download the data wirelessly off the other person's DS. But it really opened up a lot of opportunities. If you just wanted to play a quick game or something with someone, this was really great because you both had a DS, one of you had a game, and you could just have a quick race on Mario Kart, and it was incredible. And there's not anything quite like that today, especially when you consider if you wanted to do that on the GBA, you could do it on the GBA, but you needed to plug the two consoles in. Being able to do it wirelessly was a real game changer. And I remember a lot of fun was had playing Mario Kart and playing New Super Mario Brothers and stuff like that, just through download play. It was incredible. Speaking of games, let's just have a quick look. So, like I said, you've got two different slots. You can see the top one, push card to eject, and the bottom one says slot 2. So let's take a quick look at a game, shall we? Because, well, we ain't got anything in this at the moment. It's completely empty. So this is a box for a DS game, and this is the game that actually made me buy a DS in the first place. I remember seeing somebody playing New Super Mario Brothers on their coach trip. I think it must have been a school trip somewhere. And they were playing it and they were having a good time, and I thought, you know what? That looks great. I want to play it. And somehow managed to get the NTSC copy, which I would have thought had been much harder to get hold of over here, but never mind. That was a Christmas present, I think. Note how it's bigger than the console that it's meant for. And note, if I can ever get it open, flipping hell. I remember getting my first DS game and opening it up. It wasn't this one, by the way. But the box, and then this. Yeah, it's quite incredible. So they just come on these little cartridges, which will not be unfamiliar to anybody who owns a Switch, although that will. Flipping manuals, bring them back, thank you very much. And that just slots in the back of the system. Comme ça. You may be wondering what this bottom slot is about while we're on the topic, and well, that, incredibly, is for these guys. So it was the direct successor to the Game Boy Advance, even though Nintendo said it wasn't. And yeah, it will take all your GBA games. Now, there is a slight design flaw with this. Now, I should probably mention that this is not an original DS. This is a DS Lite, which came out, I want to say it was 2006, but this particular colour variant was later on, I think 2008 or so. The original DS was this big chunky silver thing, and it wasn't... I mean, it was kind of ugly, but in a pleasing way. It looked like sort of a sci-fi spaceship, something from Firefly or something. And it was very chunky. Now, that also took DS games and GBA games. Notice the slight flaw with the DS Lite in that the GBA game sticks out like a sore thumb. It's very stupid. The original DS did not have this problem, but it was a much bigger unit. This is more compact, but you lose the nice flush GBA game. Now, slot 2 wasn't used just for GBA games. There were also a few things. I'm not actually sure the exact total of peripherals that could go into this slot 2, but it was kind of like the GameCube's bottom slot where you could just stick accessories into it. And off the top of my head, there was, well, things like this Rumble Pack, which has been specifically designed for the DS Lite, and I'll just keep that in there. The original Rumble Pack is just a GBA cartridge and sticks out like a sore thumb. There was a memory expansion pack, similar to the one on the N64, and used only for one game. We'll get into that. I think that's one for later on. And there was also a little Guitar Hero thing which had 4 or maybe 5 buttons. So I don't know how you were supposed to hold your DS, but it had these little fret. It's a little Guitar Hero fret, and you could play this Guitar Hero game on here. And there was also this. And there was something that I would really like to get hold of, but it's rare as balls. A little paddle controller, and it was made specifically for, I think, Arkanoid. One of the Arkanoid games on DS, it came with it, and it was only released in Japan. I want to say it worked with a few other games as well, but again, not having one. It feels like something that I kind of need. But anyway, you can just put your GBA games in and they will work. Something else you can do if you are feeling particularly adventurous is put in a Game Boy Color game. And I can't remember if this actually works. So this is Super Jetpack DX. Might not even work on a DS anyway. But I'm curious, and if you were to put this in, this is the same size as his original Game Boy game, which I know for a fact doesn't work. And it doesn't even fit, so yeah, I'm willing to bet that doesn't work. If you can't get it in the system in the first place. But by that point, the Game Boy line was really long in the tooth, and I don't think anybody would have expected the DS to run original Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. Just quickly demonstrate what games look like. So there you go. When you've got your gaming, you can now select the 2 additional options. So all the games have little icons and they tell you what they are and who they're by. Again, a weirdly novel feature. You didn't really get that on any other system. With the PS2 and I think the GameCube, if you went into the memory card browser, you could have a look at your saved games, but the actual game didn't have any information on it whatsoever until the DS came along. Not for GBA games though, they just kind of exist. So, DS games. As you can gather, they run on both screens. Something particularly exciting that you may have picked up on if you are eagle-brained. Pause off, I'm trying to record. Something you may have picked up on if you are eagle-brained is the fact that I've just put an NTSC cartridge in this and it just worked. That was a kind of a feature of Nintendo's consoles as it was. You could just play whatever you wanted on them. And yeah, we're not going to play New Super Mario Bros. Because it just doesn't make great use of the touchscreen. But the mini-games are another thing entirely. Just going to zoom out a little here. So you had all these minigames. I can't actually remember what all these were, but this was another feature of download play. You could download play some of these minigames and just play them with people. I think these actually originated with Super Mario 64 DS. I think that was earlier than New Super Mario Brothers. Anyway, this one, look, blow into the mic to send Yoshi flying. Let's not do that one. Let's do this one. I think makes heavy use of the touchscreen, so rub the touchscreen to roll the snowman's head to the goal. Let's do it. In fact, yeah, we've got Super Mario 64 music. And yeah, this is what you did with the touchscreen, and oh dear, not doing very well. No. Can I get to the goal? Gosh, it didn't. It's a bit of a harsh minigame, that. Good grief. Yeah, so that's a demonstration of the touchscreen. And there were games, there were drawing games, there were games where you had to just tap things, there were games like Phoenix Wright, which mainly used the touchscreen as a menu, and it was all pretty fab. And there were a lot of games that just used the touchscreen as a second screen. One that springs to mind is Rayman DS. It's just a port of Rayman 2, and all it does is show you how many lives you've got. It's a bit lame. Some games made really good use of both screens, and if you watch my pinball special, then you will know that there are a couple of pinball games for the DS, and it's actually a really good system for pinball, the massive gap in between the screens notwithstanding, because it's vertical. And there were quite a few like vertical screen shooters for the DS, if I recall correctly. If you're familiar with arcade terminology, you could play games in Tate mode on a DS. You could also play GBA games. They run at full resolution, so it's cropped a little bit, but it's not terrible, and it's actually a really nice way to play GBA games because, well, it's backlit. The GBA did not have a backlight. So this actually changed quite a lot, and it meant that you could enjoy your existing library of games and still and have a new console and all the new games as well. It was just a really, really solid way to enjoy your GBA library. And actually somewhat familiar to GBA fans, because not only does this resemble the old Game & Watch games, some of which had 2 screens, like the DS, but it also very much resembles the Game Boy Advance SP, and I've got a feeling that they made that to kind of trial how this would go. Anyway, there were a few later iterations of the DS. I've mentioned the original Fat DS, as it's called, the silver. I think there was a blue and a pink variety, and possibly a few others in Japan. There was the DS Lite, of course, which originally came in very boring colours: black, silver, white. I think there was like a rose-coloured one. But then in 2008 they had some really cool colours. I think red, ice blue, I want to say, which was a bit wishy-washy, and the fabulous lime green one, which I have had so many comments about. People have said that is a fantastic DS. And you're not really getting the full it's a lot more vivid to the naked eye, is this DS, I will say. It's more of a chartreuse colour than a lime green. It's lovely. There is the DSi, which came out, I think, 2009, I want to say. I remember really wanting one of those, because that brought along things like... Well, it brought along a lot more apps, because, you know, things like the iPhone had really come into prevalence and brought apps with them, and so apps were kind of a big thing. I do have a DSi over there, but the screens aren't working properly. And, well, it had one that springs to mind off the top of the head is Flipnote Studio, which was just such a massive thing, and I remember there were a lot of people who worked almost exclusively in Flipnote Studio making little animations. It was incredible, and I wanted a DSi just for that, pretty much. But there were also a lot of games that you might have expected to cost 79p in the App Store, like the Paper Plane game, for example, or the Pioro game. There was a DSi XL, which was just DSi but bigger. And then there was this, which we won't go massively into, because this is kind of a DS in name only. I'm not sure if it's got any charge in it. Oh, it does. Incredible. So, as you see, it's a similar form factor, really. It's a bit chunkier. It's gone back to that sort of original DS sci-fi feel. It also takes 3 weeks to boot up, whereas this one, you turn it on and it's on, you know? This one takes a much longer time. Also, it's modded to all heck. Although, did I take the SD card out? Have I? Oh no, I haven't. There just doesn't seem to be very much on there. It's a bit odd. Might have to check on that. Anyhow, oh no, there we go. And there's one of the games. Yeah. That makes more sense. Yeah, that's a bit more like it. Yeah, it is pretty much a DS but better. It has the 3D capability, which you probably can't really make out on camera. It just kind of looks shimmery. But the 3D was... This is basically the only 3D that I can see and look at for any extended period of time. It also had cameras. The DSi had cameras as well. This one has an in-facing camera and also 3D cameras on the outside. They're terrible. Has a joystick like the PSP. This had a lot of people complained about this stick, but I thought it was really good. The D-pad is crap. And yeah, it's just a DS but better, and I loved this thing. I got so much use out of my 3DS. It was just insane. But the 3DS was kind of the end of the DS, because after that we had the Wii U, which was an attempt at bringing the dual screen to a more console-like setting, and then we had the Switch, and that's a handheld and a console. And that was kind of the death knell for the DS line. So, just a little bit of personal history before we finish this. Like I said, the first time I thought to myself I really want a DS was on that bus trip. Somebody was playing New Super Mario Brothers, I think my friend Liam. And there were a few other people with DS, and they were all having a whale of a time with them, and I thought, you know what, this is something that I could have a lot of fun with. Guess what? I had a lot of fun with it. But before that, I had come across the DS. Like I said, I'd seen screenshots of it and things like that, but I'd also come across it, I want to say, I was thinking about this the other night, and it seems really odd now that I think about it, but they had a bank of them set up in the local laser tag place. I think at the time it was called Laser Quest, but now it's called Laser Zone in Huddersfield. Really cool place. And they had just a couple of rows of DSs set up, and I mean, recollection notwithstanding, it might have just been 4 of them. And they were playing a game called Metroid Prime Hunters. And I remember being quite impressed by these things, and this was the first time I'd ever seen a DS laid out. It was an original DS playing like Metroid Prime Hunters. It might have been like the demo version that they put out, and it was really cool to see all these things linked together wirelessly and playing this game. It was really cool. And well, I've had my DS Lite, I had my 3DS. It's been a bit of a DS journey, and well, it was a lot better than the old GBA, which you couldn't see. Anyway, I had my DS for quite a while. I think I was on my DS Lite by this point, and I was at... I can't remember where I was now. I must have been at school, because I remember a lad called Sam told me about this fascinating little thing that you could get for your DS. And it was one of these guys. It was called an R4, and this was my first... the first time I'd ever come across a flash card. That's what this is. It reads games off flash memory, this SD card that's in there. This isn't a real R4, by the way, this is a knockoff, but what you do with it, this was incredible and so mind-blowing at the time, is that you turn it on and somehow it just boots straight into the R4 interface, and you can just load the thing up with ROMs and you can just play whatever you want. It was just incredible at the time, particularly being a kid with not a great deal of allowance. It really opened things up for me, and again got me into the world of flashcards, which has only continued with the likes of the EverDrive, which I spent a whole lot of money on. So, the reason why I'm talking so much about this weird little console, the DS, with its touchscreen and its pen, was actually a bit of a haven for edutainment at the time. And you had games such as Brain Training and Big Brain Academy and a few others. And that's what we're going to go into over the next few weeks. So stay tuned and we'll have a little DS edutainment tour. See you then.